Hello everyone, Bandit here, and Survivor Legends. Love them, hate them, they exist. For today's video, I'll be ranking the top 30 Survivor Legends in Survivor's history in an objective fashion. How do you ask? Well, I'll be looking at how often they voted correctly, opposed to how often they voted incorrectly, and establishing, once and for all, who is the best Survivor Legend. However, there are a few rules to cover. Each player will be ranked on each tribal council they attended. They receive 1 point for every win they achieve, and lose 1 point for every loss they achieve. A win means they obviously voted in the majority and got their target eliminated, while a loss means they weren't in the majority or got their target out. This is key to note, as someone in the minority that plays an idol correctly and idles out an individual successfully falls into neither category. Likewise, a person completely opposite who's in the majority and votes for someone who would have gone home, but because of an idol they lose an ally, in my eyes, doesn't necessarily win or lose the round. Instead, there is a third option, those who drew. They either came out of the tribal council in the majority but lost the vote, or won the vote but were in the minority. A draw, as you big brains out there may have already guessed, is 0 points. Just nothing but an extra statistic I'll be referencing. Fortunately, there are only a few draws that these Survivor Legends have had, so I can cover each individually, in case someone, and there always is, disagrees with me putting a certain tribal council as a draw for someone else. With the wins, draws, and losses totaled up, we can establish a point total for each person. The more points the better. Plus, I made every player's game into a tier list. Because it's 2022, of course I did. It's at this point in the video, I'd like to tell people that major spoilers are ahead, not that that was inferred by the title already. But full warning, you will be spoiled about voting results, how well players did, and how general seasons played out in Survivor US. So leave if you don't want to be spoiled. For those that stayed, I want to address what I listed as a Survivor Legend. No matter what I went with as the criteria, I felt people would disagree. After all, Survivor 42's winner Marianno may be considered as a Survivor Legend by some, as she won, but others may argue she hasn't yet achieved that status. Ultimately, my criteria was that the individual had to play at least 3 times on the show. This, I felt, drew a strong line in the sand. Moreover, I feel every 3-time player on the show has been memorable in the show's history. Some for better, some for worse. As for the players you'll be seeing in the rankings, they are Jeff Varner, Jerri Manthey, Amber Marianno, Colby Donaldson, Tina Wesson, Eastin Zohn, Rob Marianno, Rupert Boneham, Sandra Diaz Twine, Stephenie LaGrossa, Cirie Fields, Candice Cody, Jonathan Penner, Parvati Shallow, Ozzy Lusth, James Clement, Amanda Kimmel, Tyson Apostol, Benjamin, Coach, Wade, JT, Russell Hantz, Andrea Boehlke, Malcolm Freberg, Ciera Eastin, Lacina, Tony Vlachos, Kelley Wentworth, Jeremy Collins, Joe Anglim, and Aubry Bracco. Wow, those were a lot of big names. Literally. And before I add anything else, Russell and Sandra will also have their Australian games added to the rankings in Champions vs Contenders and Blood vs Water respectively. Feel free to hate. Anyways, I feel like I've done enough rambling. Let's get onto the video and see how your favourite Survivor Legends got on. When designing the tier list, I generally divided roughly groups of 6 to 7 people in one tier that differentiated in several point totals. However, after seeing how abysmal this individual did at the tribal councils they attended, they have their own tier, the F tier. This is due to the fact they literally scored negative points. I didn't even know that was possible. Now, if you had to guess who it was, you would probably think of an old school Survivor contestant, right? During an era where throwing your vote to save face was a somewhat regular occurrence. Maybe a person that had one decent season and then 2 bad ones resulting in a low point score. Well, no. Ladies and gentlemen, as coming in 30th place, the sole guardian of the F tier, with 3 wins, 3 draws and 6 losses, resulting in a minus 3 point total, we have Anglim. And this isn't even a contest. The next lowest contestants are on 5 points. This is a massive outlier from the rest of the legends. Largely considered a fan favourite by many, it's likely shocking to some that Joe is at the very bottom. Despite making the merge all 3 times, there are 2 major disadvantages to Joe's games that result in his low score. Firstly, in fact, is Joe's tribes never go to tribal council much pre-merge because he's such a beast. In both Cambodia and Edge of Extinction, he never visited tribal council once pre-merge, meaning he couldn't grind up points like the other players on this list. Ironically, going to tribal pre-merge those 3 times in Worlds Apart actually helped him score a net positive of 1 point due to correctly eliminating Nina and Joakim, but then there's the Vince tribal. I realised this was because it was a split vote plan, and if anyone votes for an individual who didn't go home, but I still counted it as a win, just know I knew it was part of a split vote. Again, I don't critique these players for placing their vote on someone to outplay an idol for the greater good of the majority, and I feel it would be unfair to give certain people draws and some other wins just because they were on the right 50-50 on who to eliminate at a tribal. So yes, the first tribal was a split vote, but Will flips his vote onto Vince, causing a 3-2-1 outcome, and the wrong person going home. As much as it sucks for Joe due to Will doing this, he lost a point due to not being in the majority, nor actually wanting Vince out. Again, Nina was the plan at that tribal. Joe's 3 draws come from idle plays. The first in Worlds Apart helped him in the minority eliminate Kelley, so although he did get his target out, he was in the minority. He then votes for Wentworth at the infamous 9 votes block tribal council, which we'll be talking about in this video a lot. Finally, he also votes for Stephen, but Jeremy plays an idol on him. Both times Joe was in the majority, but failed to get his target out. I won't be spending as much time on other contestants, but I wanted to dedicate a lot of time to Joe due to him being the first person, so I can justify where I put everything, but also because he is such an outlier. Again, no one has done this bad. The people in E tier have 5 points or more. The main issue with Joe is that when he reaches the merge, he's seen as such a challenge threat that he's either auto-eliminated like an Edge of Extinction, or, like in Worlds Apart and Cambodia, people just pick off his allies and blindside him to weaken his power in the game, since he's always immune due to the immunity necklace. Per Joe. In E tier we have Jeff Varner at 29th, with 5 points, which includes 8 wins, 2 draws and 3 losses. His 2 draws come from his elimination in the Australian Outback, and Ciera playing her idol to protect the minority in Game Changers. I know people may find issue with me calling Jeff Varner's elimination in Survivor South Africa a draw, but in my eyes it never took a majority to eliminate him. The tie system back then resulted in pass votes, which were very quickly overturned, 2 seasons later in fact, showing just how unfair production decided it was. People eliminated from the game could still have drastic effects on the events in the game, and they did. Although the opposing alliance played towards this questionable rule and used it to their advantage, some even multiple times, I still don't feel right penalising someone for a system no longer used. If you still disagree, then you can see Jeff as having 4 points anyway, so it's not a huge deal, his position doesn't change. Ultimately, it's his early eliminations from Cambodia and Game Changers that seem to do him in. And yes, I included that whole Zeke tribal as a negative point, as although there wasn't a formal vote, Varner was still unanimously voted out, and that whole tribal was an L for him anyway. In joint 27th, we have James Clement and Ciera Eastin. Two people who I doubt have ever been spoken about in the same sentence before. Both have 10 wins and 5 losses. The only difference is Ciera has 3 draws, whereas James has 1. I decided to put these individuals above Varner, as despite having the same point total, they had more wins, which I use as a tiebreaker for any future same point individuals. James's sole draw is from Tom playing an idol on himself, and JT flipping to 4 the majority split vote plan, resulting in the elimination of ally Cirie Fields. Ciera Eastin had draws from the final 6 rock draw caused by 2 consecutive ties, Kelley's minority idol play, and a field split vote plan when she voted Kimmel, and Stephen was idled by Jeremy, which caused Ciera to be promptly eliminated. If you haven't guessed already, Cambodia is the holy grail for draws. Strangely, Ciera's placements in every season doubles, from 5th to 10th to 20th. So Russell Muscle, if you need me to feature in your Survivor Facts video, I'm here, bro. James voted for PG incorrectly twice, voted Parvati after they blindsided Ozzy, and he voted Colby when he was voted out in Heroes vs Villains. Funnily, if he wasn't medically evacuated in Micronesia, he would have likely been voted out, resulting in another loss and him being 29th. Ciera voted Zohn at the second tribal, as well as Jervis twice in Blood vs Water. And yes, I know, Tyson played an idol for Jervis, but Jervis and Tyson were still in the majority, making the protection from the idol irrelevant, and they still had 3 out of 5 of the votes to eliminate Ciera. Ciera then incorrectly voted for Savage at Cass's boot, and then finally got booted at first in Game Changers as she tried to get out Michaela. The next player is tied with only one other person for the highest number of losses a Survivor legend has accumulated, and this is Colby Donaldson in 26th with 13 wins, 4 draws and 7 losses, and a 6-point total. His 4 draws come from 2 seasons. Funnily enough, he also ties a few others for having the highest number of draws in this video. His draws were the Mitchell and Jeff vote-outs that required pass votes to break a tie, and the Tom idol play, as well as the 10-man merge in Heroes vs Villains. I know some may say that this merge should have been a loss for Colby, as the villains managed to use their idols to fend off votes, likely cementing the majority for the following rounds, but neither side had a majority or a minority. They were both simply the same number, with nobody flipping, and therefore a draw I feel is the most fitting. Colby had a fantastic first season, and this gave him most of his points. He voted Roger weirdly, losing him a point as Amber was eliminated. All Stars he votes out Richard, then gets voted out by Jerry, then Heroes vs Villains happened. Oh boy. He's in the minority almost all the time, resulting in 2 losses pre-merge and 3 at the merge, as his original hero friends are picked off one by one. Speaking of heroes, in 25th with 7 points, resulting in 10 wins, 2 draws and 3 losses, we have Candice Cody, who, of course, is the most heroic hero of Survivor after betraying her entire tribe. Candice is a great example of someone who visited pre-merge tribals often, as she just grinded up points. All but one of her wins were in the Cook Islands and Heroes vs Villains pre-merge. As for Blood vs Water, there was a weird predicament. Yes, Candice was voted out, but it wasn't a formal vote out held at tribal. It was based on first impressions, and Candice couldn't even communicate with the players. Therefore, I just decided to abandon her vote out in Blood vs Water, and I didn't add it to the list in any way, shape or form. Apologies if you feel this should have been a loss added to Candice's tally, but I really don't think the first impressions mechanic is really fair for me to knock her for. Something I will knock Candice for is her merges in Cook Islands and Heroes vs Villains, where her only win is to vote against Amanda, but results in her being voted out in the next episode. Her 2 draws feature in the merge vote and Cirie blindside in Heroes vs Villains as well. On top of her vote out in Heroes vs Villains, she also incorrectly votes at the Nate vote out and her vote out in Cook Islands. Now we're into the D tier, which, much like for school, I consider any players in these tiers to have satisfactory results overall. We're starting this tier with yet another draw, as with both 8 points including 13 wins and 5 losses are Tina Wesson and Jonathan Penner. The only difference is Tina had 2 draws, whereas Penner has 0, and makes it far easier for me to write a script on, so thank you Penner for your black and white voting standard. Tina and Penner, because of their results, come in 23rd each. If instead of returning to the game, Tina was straight up eliminated on season 27, she would have been far higher on this list. Her failing to vote out Tyson, coupled with her 2 failed attempts to eliminate Jarvis on her return, make up the bulk of her blood in the water. Other losses include her voting for Ciera during the merge of Blood vs Water, and her voting for Jenna during the first Tribal of All-Stars. Her 2 draws were discussed with Colby earlier on in the video, where I felt Mitchell and Jeff's eliminations due to past votes more suited being draws rather than wins. Ultimately, Tina is just a better version of Colby. Tina also is the first instance of a Final 2 dilemma in Survivor, where she was in a Final 3 scenario but didn't win immunity. Therefore, Colby, because he was immune, had the sole vote to eliminate Keith. While some may dispute this should count as a draw for Tina, as she didn't actually cast a vote, I counted it as a win because she very clearly would have voted Keith in that Final 3 if given a vote. Moreover, any contestant that survived a Final 3 vote that led into a Final 2 got a win from me. I'm sorry if you feel different about this ideology, but I feel this is a fairly justifiable method. Penner has a very similar story to Tina, as his most recent appearance featured most of his losses. He feels to be a part of the majority and votes for Pete at the merge. Despite saving himself by playing an idol, he doesn't get his way. He also feels at the subsequent Final 10 Tribal, where he votes for Abby Maria, when Jeff instead goes home. Finally, he votes for Denise at the Tribal Council, where he ultimately gets voted out. His other 2 losses consist of his vote out in Cook Islands and voting for Parvati when Young Man gets blindsided in Micronesia. Micronesia is particularly interesting since Penner was never voted out and was actually medically evacuated. Although I'm sure this was heartbreaking for Penner, seeing the dominance of the all-female Black Widow Brigade coming into the merge, had he stayed in the game any longer, he likely would have appeared lower on this list. A surprising 8-point finisher with 14 wins, 3 draws and 6 losses appears 22nd on this list, and that is Aubry Bracco. With Joe already covered, this means we have talked about 2 of the 3 eligible captains. On Edge of Extinction. You really know how to pick 'em, Jeff. Aubry was rather surprising, as although she did come out with a -1 score in Edge of Extinction, due to her being blindsided at the only tribal she attended, I thought her other 2 seasons would garner a stronger result. Kurong for sure was her strongest season, and one of the best showings you can ever have. She overall achieves 8 wins on this season alone, and this includes her voting for Pete at the first Brains Tribal, where a split vote occurred on him and Liz in case of an idol. The worst part of her Kurong performance is literally only a single draw at the Final 4, where she was forced into fire making with Sydney. I credit her for flipping Ty, but I discredit her for being unable to flip Michelle, so a draw in this instance seems appropriate. Game Changers was really a rollercoaster for Aubry, as she achieved 6 wins but 5 losses. She votes Michaela at the JT boot, Zeke at the Aussie boot, Brad at the Andrea boot, Ty at the Michaela boot, and Troyzan at her elimination. She also received 2 draws this season at the Tribal where the minority idol Ciera and Advantage Geddon, which is literally just everyone playing idols, and Cirie, who received no votes this Tribal, got eliminated. At 21st we have Malcolm Freberg, who is the first player to have a total of 9 points. He has 14 wins, 2 draws and 5 losses. Malcolm very much reinforces the perspective that going to Tribal pre-merge helps with scoring. In Survivor Philippines, just 1 season, he achieves 10 total wins, only at the cost of 2 losses, which featured during the Jeff Kent boot and his own blindside, where he votes for Pete and Denise respectively. I also gave him a point for successfully being part of the merge RC and Penner vote split. Survivor Caramoan features only 2 wins and 3 losses, with him failing to vote out Cherry and Reynolds at the first 2 rounds of the Survivor Caramoan merge, and him failing to vote out Andrea at his elimination. Sure, he gets out Philip, but due to my criteria, the 3 Amigos Tribal is actually only a draw, as him, Eddie and Reynolds failed to achieve majority. Game Changers actually really work well for Malcolm despite his early exit, as he gains 2 wins pre-swap and then gets idled by the minority, which causes a draw. Also on 9 points with 15 wins, 3 draws and 6 losses, we have Kelley Wentworth, our final Edge of Extinction captain we will be covering. Kelley's San Juan del Sur game is really nothing to write home about, just a correct Drew vote out into an incorrect Baylor vote out at her blindside coming into the swap. Cambodia happened, where again, I just want to reiterate the fact Cambodia was such a train wreck with people constantly flipping on each other. On the final 6 tribal where Kelley played an idol but wasn't in the majority and so achieved a draw. She also votes for Kimmel as part of a failed vote split plan, but she only loses Ciera because Jeremy idols Stephen, so I don't hold that against her. Finally, at the final 12 tribal, she did get her way by voting out Andrew, but did have to block a record-setting 9 votes to achieve it. Surprisingly, despite being on the bottom, Kelley never actually suffers losses for the majority of Cambodia. This year is at the final 7 and onward, where she loses Aubry and both the final 5 and 4 tribals, where she incorrectly votes for Spencer at both of them. Edge of Extinction really is where Kelley shines, as despite voting for David when Joe was blindsided and voting for Aurora when she was voted out, Kelley achieved 8 wins over the course of the season. Pretty impressive considering she only made it to the final 9 on an 18-person cast. At 19th we have Amber Marianno with the first 10-point total and the final D-tier player. This consists of 13 wins, 2 draws and 3 losses. Amber has a pretty standard result, where her only draws are due to the Jeff Varner tribal and her losing Mitchell because of the stupid pass votes rule. Her 3 losses consist of her 2 eliminations in Winners at War and Australia, as well as voting Elizabeth at the tribal Jerri is booted. Really the standout for me is Amber's All-Star game, where she achieves nothing but 9 wins in total, which is incredible. She didn't get to vote at the final 3, but again I gave her a win, because Boston Rob chose to vote out Jenna instead of her. Overall there's nothing really to bash Amber for, it's just a shame she was the first boot on her tribe in Winners at War, because it really puts a roof on the amount of points she can achieve with just 2 proper seasons. Next up we have C tier, which is pretty decent. If any of these Survivor legends are watching, give yourselves a pat on the back for achieving this tier placement. Funnily enough, we're starting with a draw between 3 players with 15 wins, 4 losses and 11 points overall. First we'll begin with Eastin, who is the only other person on this list to achieve 0 draws over their Survivor legacy. In Africa, he votes correctly every single tribal, scoring him 11 wins. If you can't tell, this means in an alternate universe, if Eastin only played Survivors Africa, he would funnily enough have ended up on the exact same spot in this list, as he scored 11 points. But we're in this reality, and unfortunately in All-Stars there was a pretty hostile anti-winner sentiment, which caused Eastin to have to play defense for the majority of the game. This meant he got losses when voting for Jenna at the first tribal, Jerri at the tribal Colby was voted out, and Jerri again at the tribal he was voted out. Despite a small stint in Winners at War, he manages to scrape out a positive of 1, as he correctly votes out Natalie and Danny, but votes for Adam at the tribal he's eliminated. But of course, Eastin is tied with another player, and funnily enough, they're also another winner that was on the same Selly tribe as Eastin. Of course, it's Jeremy Collins. Again, they have the same 15 wins and 4 loss record as Eastin, but they have a large 4 draw total, which is tied for the largest draw score across the board. Jeremy, like Kelley, really didn't have much going on in San Juan del Sur. He voted out Drew and Josh correctly, then was blindsided by his allies at the subsequent tribal. Cambodia, I'm sounding like a broken record here, but literally, try being in my shoes and having to narrate over all these 1s and 0s. It looks like I'm halfway to coding my own game. Nonetheless, Jeremy scored a win for splitting the vote on Ciera at the Cast Boot Tribal, but only gets a draw after losing his ally in Savage after Kelley blocked 9 votes cast against her with her idol, although he was in the majority at least. That being said, 2 tribals later, he plays his idol on Stephen, and, despite being in the minority, successfully eliminates Ciera. He votes for Joe at the next tribal, where Stephen is voted out, but then gets out Joe and Abby Maria the next tribals while being in the majority. The final 6 vote was a draw for him too, as although he got rid of Kimmel, he wasn't able to get a majority, nor did he get out Kelley, which he originally put the votes onto. That being said, he doesn't lose an ally and isn't in the minority. A draw seems fair. Winners at War features 2 losses, where he fails to vote out Adam and instead loses his closest ally in Natalie, and also fails to vote out Ben at the tribal he gets eliminated. Then finally, completing the trifecta, we have the original villainess herself, Jerri Manthey. As for Jerri, she gets draws both from the Mitchell Boot and Jeff Varner blindside in Survivor Australia. Both require past votes. She also gets 2 draws in Heroes vs Villains, as she loses Tyson, but manages to eliminate JT at the merge. She also amasses 4 losses, which come from her 3 eliminations in Australia All-Stars Heroes vs Villains, plus her voting for Courtney when Coach was voted out. JT is next on the list with 12 points, 14 wins, 3 draws and 2 losses. JT's biggest boons come from the fact he was completely adored in token chains and visited many pre-merge tribal councils. He voted correctly every time, except when he voted for Aaron instead of Coach at the final 5 tribal. He even correctly voted within the majority during the Brendan merge vote. For Heroes vs Villains, he's actually safe by the fact his elimination was considered as a draw due to the fact it required an idol to get him out. Although some may view him eliminating Cirie as a win, it did require an idol play whilst he aligned with the minority, so I personally view it as a draw. In Game Changers, he gets a draw for losing Malcolm at the Ciera tribal, and his second loss comes from his elimination. Apart from that, there isn't really much to say. An interesting fact is that JT is the first person we have covered in the video to only have 2 losses. This is the smallest amount of losses any Survivor legend has had, and it is an impressive feat. We've reached 14th on this list now, where Rupert Boneham, fellow hero, lies. With a total of 17 wins, 2 draws and 5 losses, Rupert places on this list. His strong Pearl Islands game helps a lot, as his only loss that season was during his blindside. That being said, with the relatively small cast size on Pearl Islands, 3 pre-merge tribals, and his early exit at merge, all result in him only getting a few wins overall. In fact, his All-Stars and Heroes vs Villains both gave him 6 wins and 2 losses each. These come in the forms of him voting for Eastin during Rudy's elimination in All-Stars, his elimination in All-Stars as he attempts to vote out Rob, his vote for Parvati as Amanda is eliminated in Heroes vs Villains, and of course his elimination subsequently as he attempts to vote out Sandra. His 2 draws both occur in Heroes vs Villains during the previously mentioned Cirie and JT vote outs. Rupert also appeared in Blood vs Water, but again, he was a victim of the first impressions twist, or rather should I say his wife Laura was. Nonetheless, like Candice, I just ignored this twist that caused his elimination. The final C-tier contestant places 13th with 20 wins, 2 draws and 8 losses. We have Ozzy Lusth, the Dolphin Boy himself. Ozzy features the most losses of anyone on this list with 8. In Cook Islands, Becky is his Achilles heel. As the second tribal he attends, he fails to vote her out, and he also fails to eliminate her at the final 4, and she wins the fire making challenge. Eventually, against Sandra. That being said, again, it's not like Ozzy is in the minority at this final 4 vote, so I gave him a draw for this. Micronesia was phenomenal for Ozzy, as his only loss was during his blindside. He also visited the tribal a lot pre-merge this season, resulting in 6 wins before merge even hit. Unfortunately, South Pacific follows, which is the main culprit for Ozzy's 8 loss total. In this one season, he received 5 losses and only 2 wins. Funny enough, these 2 wins were the first 2 boots in the tribe with Mark and Semhar. After that, he loses Elise while trying to eliminate Cochrane, which isn't great. Controversially, I put his pre-merge boot in South Pacific as a draw, as although he was eliminated while voting for Cochrane, he asked his tribe to eliminate him so he could beat Christine in the duel. This was a strategy implemented by Ozzy because he wanted his tribe to have the even numbers against the opposing tribe coming into the merge. Mind you, we all know how the South Pacific merge went, but Ozzy wasn't, in my eyes, part of the minority, despite being booted from this tribal, so I count it as a draw. Ozzy then returns to the game, only to lose Keith, and then he gets voted out again, while trying to, catch a train. Ozzy mustn't have realised he wasn't wanted in the game, because for the third time he wins his way back into the game, only to fail to vote out Sophie and lose Rick, and then gets voted out once and for all at the final 4. Despite not visiting many Game Changers tribals, Ozzy gets 3 wins this season, and his 8th and final total loss comes from his vote out as he tries to boot Zeke. Now to the next tier. Spoilers, but A tier only has 4 people, and S tier only has 1. Starting off the B tier, we have Tyson Apostol in 12th with 16 wins, 2 draws and 3 losses, resulting in a 13-point total. In Tocantins, Tyson only visits 2 pre-merge tribals, but does vote correctly coming into the merge. He places his vote onto Ciera, and also Brandon is eliminated that tribal. As I've already covered in earlier examples, any majority enacting a purposeful split vote plan gets a win irrespective of if the person they voted for actually got eliminated. After that, he gets voted out. He didn't get to visit many tribals this season, and unfortunately for Tyson, this is a trend that continues. We see no better example of this than in Heroes vs Villains, where he correctly eliminates Randy, but gets idled out by Russell while trying to boot Parvati. That being said, Tyson was still part of the majority, and if it wasn't for the majority having an idol, then he would get his target out, and so he still got a draw. His Blood vs Water game is far better as an improvement, as he gets 9 wins this season, no losses, and only 1 draw from the final 6 rock situation. Finally, we have Winners at War, where he correctly votes Amber, only to get blindsided by his tribe whilst trying to eliminate Nick. During this season, he comes back from the edge of extinction, however, and so he's able to correctly eliminate Wendell and Adam, but unfortunately suffers his 3rd and final loss of the final 10 tribal council, where Jeremy decides to dip. Tyson doesn't have a bad showing per se, and the fact he's only had 3 losses in his Survivor career is pretty impressive, but with such stiff competition in the B tier, having early eliminations in 3/4 of the season you played just isn't good enough. Now we've reached 11, and again with 13 points, but this time 18 wins, 1 draw and 5 losses, we have Coach. Despite being the punching bag for many players on Survivor, and even being presented as somewhat delusional, I think you do have to credit Coach for achieving such a high score despite how he is presented. Tocantins was a pretty mixed bag for him, as I've already stated with Tyson, the Timbira tribe really didn't visit many pre-merge tribals, and so this, plus him getting blindsided during the Tyson and Debbie blindsides as well as his own, meant he only got a small net positive of 1 this season. Heroes vs Villains was actually somehow even worse for him, as the only vote he got correct was Randy. He then suffers when Parvati gets idled by Russell, and 2 losses while trying to vote for Courtney during Rob's elimination, and then during his boot. So you might be wondering, with a 0-point total after 2 seasons, how on earth is Coach so high on this list? Well, little Timmy, let me tell you about the season called South Pacific. To give credit where credit is due, Coach completely dominates this season and achieves 13 wins without a single draw or loss. One of his wins also included the merge vote, as although there was originally a 6-6 tie on Keith and Rick, I do credit Coach's side for being able to flip Cochrane on the revote and thus creating a majority. So take some notes, kids. If you want to do well in Survivor, create your own cult. In 10th place, both 20 wins, 1 draw and 6 losses, this time is Andrea. Andrea, much like Rupert, made it very far into all 3 of her seasons, and this really helped her total. Her first season, Redemption Island, featured a loss at the 2nd vote due to the tribe blindsiding Matt. She then gets voted out of the game while trying to eliminate Philip, only to re-enter the game, and then immediately she gets voted out again while trying to take out Rob. She also gets the green light from me at her first tribal, because even though she votes for Christina, it was part of a vote split. Andrea actually has a few of these technicalities, as we see further in Caramoan, where I gave her wins for the Brandon vote out, although not a tribal council was identified as a tribal by Jeff, and did give everybody the ability to cast a vote. She also gets a win from Malcolm's elimination, as although she couldn't vote due to being involved in the tie, she obviously would have voted to eliminate Malcolm if given the opportunity on the revote. Other things to note is the Three Amigos tribal is a draw due to her being in the majority, but failing to eliminate her target, and she incorrectly votes Brenda at her boot. Despite receiving a net positive of 4 in Game Changers, Andrea loses a bit of stock coming into the merge. She does correctly split the votes on Michaela at Haley's vote out, but votes Zeke at Ozzy's, and she attempts to vote out Brad when she is eliminated herself. Man oh man, we're on to number 9 on this list, where you have officially left the double digits. And ironically, on the topic of double digits, with 18 points, yes, I know, a massive jump, including 25 wins, 4 draws and 7 losses, we have our first 2-time winner, Sandra Diaz Twine. Obviously, by winning the game twice, you're going to appear higher on this video, as you evade the 2 losses that come with being voted out. That being said, Sandra still has some odd losses, such as voting John during Rupert's blindside, and Lil during Krista's blindside. Both of these are strange considering Sandra wanted to so willingly isolate John and risk losing majority at the final 8, as well as her voting for Lil because she doesn't think she can beat her in the end, only to get to the end with Lil and beat her pretty handily. However, every tribal outside of those 2 instances were wins for her, and they definitely add up. I also want to address the final 3 situation where Lil wins immunity and votes out John. Again, I've covered this already previously, but I give Sandra a win for this because if she had a vote, she obviously would have voted for John. Heroes vs Villains is the 2nd season Sandra wins, and again she only incorrectly votes twice. In these instances, however, it is far more justifiable. She votes Russell as Rob is blindsided and Rupert as Danielle is blindsided. Like the other hero and villains that made the merge, she received 2 draws from the tribal where Russell plays his idol on Parvati. Fortunately for me having to write this script, her other 2 games are far shorter, as both in Game Changers and Winners at War she is a pre-merge boot. During Game Changers, she breaks even with 2 wins during the Ciera blindside and JT boot, 1 draw that comes from Malcolm getting idled out, and 2 losses where she votes for Aubry at the 2nd Tribal Council and tie at her boot. Winners at War, despite her small stint, gives her a net positive of 2 as she correctly eliminates Amber and Tyson. Then at the swap she gets idled out by Denise, and so, because Denise was part of the minority, I counted this as a draw. Finally, she made a brief appearance in Australian Survivor Blood vs Water. In spite of voting for individuals who had idols, it was part of split vote plans, and even though it was a mock vote, I gave her another win for correctly eliminating Sophie. Finally, she does get voted out at the swap by her own daughter Nina. She voted out her own mom! So that's where the final loss comes from. Not too bad for a Survivor legend, but we'll be talking about another 2-time winner that places higher on this list shortly. Next up we have a draw, and both these contestants have 19 points. Both these players have 21 wins and 2 losses, but firstly I want to start with Stephenie LaGrossa, who has 0 draws. Stephenie began Survivor in Season 10, Palau, and was part of the incredible Oolong tribe. That was sarcasm for those unaware. In both the Angie and James votes, she does achieve majority, but requires a revote after the initial vote. Because Oolong lost all its tribe members, this caused the final 2 on that tribe and Stephenie and Bobby to have to compete in a fire making challenge. A natural vote didn't occur, and although Stephenie did beat Bobby John in fire making, it wasn't a vote. Originally I debated putting the fire making as a draw, but decided to just ignore them in the rankings because an organic vote doesn't occur for them. Even in a final 4 fire making situation, only the person who wins immunity decides to get the 2 people that will go to fire, and 1 person is in the majority. So when the fire making does continue to pop up on this list, I'll be referencing what happens, but just ignoring it as a statistic, much like the first impressions twist. Her Guatemala game was fantastic, as she received nothing but 12 wins and even achieved a win for surviving the final 3 round, as Rafe was eliminated over her. Despite 2 good seasons under her belt in Heroes vs Villains, she draws even, as she correctly eliminates Sugar but then gets voted out at the next tribal council. Stephenie did well to be so high on this list, but her early elimination meant she was essentially playing with only 2 seasons. The same can be said about the next person she's tied with 21 wins, 1 draw and 2 losses. We have Tony Vlachos. I told you I would be covering the second 2-time winner of Survivor soon. Despite the small cast in Cagayan, Tony achieves 10 wins with no draws or losses. There is one small technicality at the final 3, but as I've already said, any person that survives the final 3 round is in the majority, and therefore I count it as a win. In Game Changers, he correctly votes for Ciera, but is blindsided at the next tribal council as he tries to boot Aubry. Lastly, but definitely not least, we have his winners at Wargame. He begins by voting for Kim, but this was part of a vote split on Amber, and so I gave him a win. Then, on his swap tribe, he votes for Denise within the majority, but fails to eliminate her due to Denise playing an idol on herself. He loses Sandra, an ally, but again, this was because Denise cancelled every vote but her own. Coming into the merge, he consistently achieves wins, even at the 4-3-2 Sophie tribal, where he blindsides ally Sarah Lacina. The final win by technicality for him comes at the final 6. This was a tribal where him, Natalie and Ben all played idols and eliminated all the votes on the board. Because of this, on the revote, Sarah and Denise were the only 2 eligible contestants to be voted for. On the revote, Tony votes for Denise, and in a unanimous vote she is eliminated. At the final 5 tribal, he's blindsided when Ben is voted out, while he tries to vote out Michelle. Following that, at the final 4, he gets put into a fire making competition with Sarah and beats her, but because the final 4 fire making twist doesn't consist of a majority to eliminate someone, I just ignored this as a statistic. From villain to villain, in 6th we have the infamous Russell Hantz, who also has 19 points, 22 wins, 3 losses but 3 draws. Despite receiving a draw for being in the minority during the Kelley blindside, Russell achieves nothing but wins during Survivor Samoa. This was a great start for Russell, as the 13 wins he achieved this season make up the main bulk of his total. Heroes vs Villains rewards him with 9 more wins but 2 draws, both of the Tyson vote out and the JT blindside at the merge. He also gets his first loss at the final 12 tribal, where instead of voting for Coach like the majority did, he votes for Courtney. For those unaware, the fact Russell has obtained 13 wins in his first season and 9 wins in his second season means he's completely maxed out his win total in just 2 seasons. For both his Redemption Island and Champions vs Contenders games, he's immediately voted out. The first tribal his tribe attends is the first opportunity they get to boot him from the game. This means he gets a loss for voting Ralph at the tribal he is eliminated, and also receives a loss for voting Damien at the Australian Survivor Tribal Council, because, albeit on the revote, he gets voted out. The issue with the past 4 contestants is that they have at least one season where they are early boots. Despite having good seasons, it makes it really hard for them to be able to achieve higher scores, as they're essentially playing a season down. And so that wraps up the B tier, thus resulting in only 5 legends left to rank. We've talked about Russell, but perhaps one of the most iconic alliances he was a part of was with his band of villains, much like our 5th place finisher. With 20 points consisting of 26 wins, 3 draws and 6 losses, we have Parvati. She just squeaks into the A tier with a point total 1 higher than the rest. In the pre-merger Cook Islands, Parvati completely kills it with 6 wins, but is unable to keep that momentum coming into the merge. She receives 3 losses as she votes for Yule at the merge when Nate is blindsided, she votes for Jonathan when Candice is voted out, and she votes for Sandra when she is eliminated in Cook Islands. In fact, her only win coming into the merge was a correct vote for Panner. Micronesia is far better for her, as she achieves nothing but 8 wins, and I even gave her a win for surviving the final 3, as Amanda voted to eliminate Cirie over her. Her only non-win was a draw at the final 6 where Amanda plays an idol, and she votes for Alexis. Did she get the vote right? Yes, but it required a minority idol play to do so. In Heroes vs Villains, she obtains her obligatory 2 draws for anyone that survives the merge vote, due to her being in the minority but surviving the Tyson vote due to Russell's idol, and the merge where she required idols to save the villains. Her only loss this season was at the final 7, where Russell and Jerri flip on the villains to vote out Danielle. Coming into Winners at War, it was going to be hard for Parvati to keep up her insanely high average placement. Although she correctly votes at the first 2 votes, she votes for Adam when her ally in Eastin is blindsided. She makes it to the swap but is down 3-2, and unfortunately she isn't able to flip Nick and gets voted out. Ultimately, I think we can agree with her history in mind that Parvati is a fantastic survivor legend and fully worthy of the A tier placement. Sneaking into 4th, almost like a cop turned criminal weirdly, with 21 points we have Ciera Lacina with 23 wins, 1 draw and 2 losses. Her original game, Survivor Cagayan, is very much like Kelley Wentworth's San Juan del Sur game, where she correctly eliminates Alexis, only to then be eliminated herself at the next tribal council. Fortunately, the producers felt Ciera had potential and put her onto Game Changers. She splits on Michaela at the Healy boot, which is great, and gets a draw for being a part of Advantage Get-In, but apart from that she votes correctly at all the tribals she attends. She ultimately gets 11 wins from this season and 11 wins from the next season we'll be covering. Winners at War. There are a few technicalities associated with this season, such as her voting for Kim as part of a split vote against Amber, her voting for Michelle as part of a split vote against Jeremy, and her surviving the final 6. But they're all wins, and that's what matters. For the 3rd time now, she is an individual put into the fire making challenge, and like the other 2, I just ignore this fire making statistic. The only loss she achieves in Winners at War was at the final 9, where a 4-3-2 vote orchestrated by Tony is used to blindside her ally Sophie. Despite getting outplayed by Tony in this instance and losing in fire making to him, Ciera gets the last laugh as she just barely edges him out in regards to these rankings. Coming in 3rd and nabbing bronze is Cirie Fields. Again, she has 21 points, but this consists of 25 wins, 4 draws and 4 losses. Her initial season, Panama, features a pretty strong performance, with only 1 loss as she votes for Shane at the 2nd tribal council, and a draw at the final 4 as she flips Aris but fails to flip Terry to eliminate Danielle. In Micronesia, again, she receives wins all season long, except for a draw that happens at the final 6 due to Amanda playing the idol on herself, as well as her getting eliminated at the final 3, which I counted as a loss. If you thought that rollercoaster of emotions wasn't enough, we have Heroes vs Villains, where despite being in the majority and correctly eliminating both Sugar and Stephenie, she then gets idled out at the next tribal council by the minority. The most losses Cirie has received in her career comes from Game Changers, and even then she comes out of the season with a net positive of 3. She votes for Michaela at a split vote tribal, where Healy is booted at the merge vote. Ciera, the subsequent tribal where Ozzy is eliminated, and she votes for Aubry when Michaela is voted out at the final 7. Finally, at the final 6 tribal, she is a victim of Advantage Get-In, a tribal council where everyone in the game was immune, either through an idol, a legacy advantage, or the immunity necklace. Cirie was the only one this tribal council to not be immune, and therefore was auto-eliminated, causing yet another draw. Cirie's vote outs in her 4 games have always been bizarre, and she is easily the most unlucky individual to play Survivor. Ironically, much like in her Survivor journey, she's been pipped at the post and unable to officially win. But in 2nd is quite a humble name which isn't as big in the community, especially nowadays as a Russell Hantz, Cirie Fields, Parvati Shallow, but displays an incredible voting record with one of the smallest loss totals. Taking silver, we have Amanda Kimmel with 22 points that consists of 24 wins, 3 draws and 2 losses. To put it simply, Amanda has 3 incredible seasons under her belt, where she always knew what was going on. In China, she achieved nothing but wins. No draws, no losses, just 9 straight wins. This is pretty darn impressive, considering the dominance of the Fei Long tribe, coupled with the fact the cast only had 16 people. Micronesia contains one of her 2 losses, as she votes for Jason as Ozzy is blindsided. She also votes out Alexis, but needs an idol to save herself from receiving a majority of the votes. Finally, we have Heroes vs Villains, which, spoilers, is the only season in Survivor history where Amanda is actually voted out. On the Heroes tribe, she gets 4 out of 5 of the eliminations correct, and only fails to vote out Tom, although that was because he played an idol while in the minority. At the merge, she isn't in the minority, but Parvati plays her idol on Jerri, thus making all the votes cast against her immune. Again, this is another draw for her, and if you think I've referenced this Heroes vs Villains merge a lot, it's because I have. Literally 9 out of 10 of the individuals that made this merge all have been discussed on this list. So I apologise if it feels repetitive, but unfortunately it's something I have to do so people have a perfect understanding of each person's ranking. After the merge vote, she incorrectly votes Parvati, as she is eliminated and her torch is snuffed. Overall, an incredible showing for Amanda, and her not winning despite her incredible record and performances really reinforces in my eyes what Jeff was saying at the reunion.
And yet there's this one quality that seems to elude you, and it's that killer instinct. Does this haunt you in life as well?
And number 1, the gold medalist of Survivor Legends, and the individual with the best voting record, boasting a massive 24-point total, with 28 wins, 1 draw and 4 losses, we have Rob Marianno. So, for everyone that's saying Boston Rob is overrated, you might have to think again. But yes, when it comes to voting records over a Survivor Legends legacy, Boston Rob takes the crown. He receives 4 wins and 1 loss in Marquesas, as he is booted during the merge, and nothing but 8 wins in All Stars. Then in Heroes vs Villains, Rob receives 1 of each statistic. He gets a win for booting Randy, a draw for being part of the majority but failing to eliminate Parvati, and a loss to the 3rd tribal he attends as he's voted out while trying to boot Russell. Redemption Island is notorious for Boston Rob's dominant gameplay, and this video is no exception to that. In this season, he achieves 13 wins, and this includes voting for Philip at the 3rd tribal council he attends. Philip didn't get booted, but this was part of a vote split in case Christina had another idol. Finally, he features on Winners at War, a season that originally went well for him, with both Natalie and Danny blindsides being positives for his game. Unfortunately, with all good there is bad, and he fails to eliminate Adam at the Eastin blindside, as well as Ciera at his vote out. Because he received 2 losses this season, Winners at War consists of the most losses Boston Rob has had in his career. I know there will be people trying to undermine Rob being the best Survivor legend in terms of voting records due to the fact he's played 5 seasons. To those people, I would just like to remind them 2 things. Firstly, despite being one of the biggest threats on the majority of the seasons he's played, Rob has never achieved a net negative on any of his seasons. Moreover, contestants like the aforementioned Russell are great examples that playing a lot of Survivor seasons can actually have major downsides, as in his 2 most recent appearances, he leaves both seasons with net negatives of -1. I want to thank everyone for watching this video and all the new subscribers on the channel. As always, I'm appreciative of any forms of support. Leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed this series, as I did a lot of time researching, script writing, editing, and processing. Nonetheless, thanks for watching, have a great day, and as always, peace!